Hello, my name is Anand Chingran. I'm going to talk to you about how federation is just one continuous uh, concept in building out your graph. StepZen uh, is a startup that's focused on delivering one GraphQL API for all your data. Today, the interconnections between the backends get coded into the application. And application one may say go to the map subsystem, then connect it with product subsystem. If an error happens, then do the following thing. Then app two may do something slightly different, or maybe the same thing across different or same backends. The net is that there's spaghetti code, but all the interconnection logic sits in code. With GraphQL, there's an opportunity for developers and for teams and for enterprises to actually create those interconnections in a separate layer, the GraphQL layer. And it is a GraphQL layer then that interconnects across the backends, and apps just communicate with that. That enables one place where all the interconnection flows and logic can be encoded. Of course, this can happen across public APIs and across private APIs. So how this is done in StepZen? So imagine that there is a subsystem that has got information on geo, for example, maps or weather or something like that. And it may expose an interface where you take an address and it returns lat long. It may take another interface that you take an address and a business name and return the closest business to that address. And this may connect using what we call REST backend, because the backend may support REST APIs. There may be a second backend that may be on a database, and that may contain customer information, and it may take email and return ID, or it may take ID and return the name and address of the customer. And suddenly you see that if you feed the ID of one system into the ID of the other, then you can go and you can connect a graph and use email to get name and address. You may have a third system that is an order subsystem, and that may be backed by a REST API or a set of REST APIs, and it may take a customer ID and return the date and amount of that order or whatever else you have it. So these are kind of three subsystems. Each of them have got their own small little graphs. But then when you kind of bring them together, you have an opportunity to interconnect these graphs. You could, for example, take the name and address of a customer, convert it into a string, add a business name, and then send it to the geo subsystem. And now you can get the closest business with some name to the customer that is your customer. Or you can take the ID generated out of the email query and connect it with customers, and now suddenly you can get all the orders associated with that particular customer. So the net of it is that you are actually connecting the dots by taking the output of one system and feeding into the other with certain sets of transformations as and when needed. And that is a fundamental principle by which StepZen builds out the graph, whether you're building out your local graph or whether you're building out your global graph. You all do it in exactly the same way. So if you're a small team, you might end up building one graph. And in that one graph, it may look something like this, where there's a set of backends that come together and you're able to connect the dots out there. But if you're a large team, if you're an enterprise, you may actually build a graph out of graphs. Team one could end up building a geo subgraph, which connects again maps and weather and everything else. Team two may end up building an e-commerce subgraph that connects against customer database, order database, delivery database, and everything else. And then somebody can actually bring all of these things together and connect the dots across all of them. The fundamental principle remains the same, that interconnections happen when the query in one subsystem is called with data from the other. So in StepZen, developers can easily assemble their graphs, whether they're assembling small graphs or large graphs. They can assemble by either allowing us to introspect the backends or connecting the backends through using REST, DB queries, or GraphQL queries. And then if you give this endpoint to StepZen, then StepZen actually runs it in its containers and it scales and performs an optimization. So you don't have to worry about it. So it's very easy to build, and it's even easier to get it to deploy and run on StepZen, so that you can just basically focus on what your applications need rather than all the running and managing associated with that.